Hello, my friends. It's 2 o'clock, and welcome back to the Pastor's Chat. Weekdays, we gather here in this way at 2 o'clock or around 2 o'clock. And I'm grateful for those of you who come regularly. And what do? Well, we ask each other, how are you? How are you doing today? A question that if you do not pay attention to the answer to it, for yourself in some level of honesty, will bite you. It will not help you to deny the reality of your life. Certainly not the good things, but especially not the difficult things. I'm wearing a suit today because among the many varied things I do from time to time, I am called upon to officiate at funerals. Today, a funeral for a woman who lived 1 century and spent the last 12 years of her life not really knowing where she was. So in some ways a relief for a family, but my goodness, was it cold. my hands are still, they're still frozen from this, and I had gloves on. But I've said from time to time, there's no colder place, both physically or psychologically or spiritually, than some days in the cemetery. And today, it was cold in all those dimensions. I'm glad to be here in this chair. Oh, there's my yawn of relaxation. It comes every day at this time. And there's your chair. I see there's a hymn book on your chair, and maybe you're planning on singing today. So we continue in this season of Epiphany. The coming season, the one which is next, starts with Ash Wednesday, and we enter into Lent. And if the season of Epiphany is an outward-looking or an upward-looking for lights that are shining, for discoveries and awarenesses of things that we have not yet seen, or things that we've seen before and then forgotten about and need to be rediscovered and added to our life again, the season of Lent is a time of introspection. The discipline of Lent, the idea of Lent, the idea of the human practice of Lent is, in order to deepen your awareness and your presence on this planet, deprive yourself of something. Purposefully deprive yourself of something. When I was growing up, the town I lived in Lambertville, New Jersey, was predominantly Catholic, although there was a big Presbyterian church in that town. It was dwarfed by the presence of the Catholic Church and the Catholic school and all of that. And there was just this regular discipline of every Friday, the Catholics did not eat meat. And the firehouse made a fortune because they would have a fish dinner every Friday night. And it was a great source for families to find fish, something besides meat to eat. But growing up in that town too, we were aware that during Lent, there were regular things that you just did without. Sometimes it was meat for the entire 40 days. Sometimes some families would give up alcohol for Lent. Anything that you enjoyed and appreciated as a part of your life. But that season of Lent was in some ways to be, liturgically opposite from the push of Epiphany. Lent is about awareness too, but Epiphany is about discovery. It's about aha. It's about eureka. And seeing ourselves and understanding ourselves in new ways in the unfolding of life and what life is. So I told you yesterday that it's intimidating for me. It is. To come here and say, how are you? And be like the guru of how are you, being I'm the one that asks, how are you? And then try to live out some level of transparency which says, I can tell you how I am. Because the truth is, it's not easy for me. I'm pretty good at creating a sense of I'm okay and I'm happy and everything. And then, I'm just like everybody else. I'm a fairly optimistic person. I like to be happy, but it doesn't always give you an insight into how I am. I'm just giving you that. I don't want you to come questing. But I can say to you that today I'm good. I feel good today. I don't know, life on life's terms. Right now, right here today, even with everything that I have in view, everything that I know about what's happened inside the circumference of my world and others that I care about, I'm good. I'm good. I have been with some people in the last couple of days whose hearts are broken beyond repair. They will weep in some ways for the rest of their lives. I always, having just completed a funeral service, if you will, for a very small COVID-restricted group, I always rehearse my own sort of theory of humanity in funerals, and that is that grief is not temporary, it's not for the moment. Grief actually grows out of the tearing of the fabric of our lives. That no person is a self, is a person without regard to who else is in their lives. We are garments of woven thread, and our lives are all intertwined with each other. In some way, the church seeks to live that out by inviting people to come into a room or a space, however big or small, and engage in the discipline of prayer and singing of songs and strengthening of faith by bringing other people together. Creating a community. Because what community does, what praying in the presence of other people does, is it gives us a better view of who we are. We're not islands unto ourselves. We are not. Our consciousness is not the result of only one person. Our hearts beat in rhythm and response to other human beings. And so in my funeral service, I talk about that. I talk about that as a kind of a life on life's terms that say we are creatures, but we are not individual creatures. We are the human in some ways. We belong together. The Hebrew theology had a much stronger way of characterizing this, in that without really understanding it, we refer to a whole nation of people with one person's name, Israel. Israel is not, originally was not the name of a geographic country. It's the name of a person in history. And that we are the people of Israel means that we are the descendants of a human being who lived so long ago. The Bible often refers to the community, the emerging community of people walking in covenant with God as Jacob. Jacob, the whole community is referred to under the name of Jacob. In the New Testament, as Jesus is beginning his ministry and Pharaoh decides to kill all the children under the age of 2 in order to try to catch the prospective Messiah, coming leader, king of Israel, in a net, it says that as the massacre was taking place, you could hear Rachel weeping. And it wasn't to look for a woman named Rachel. It was to look for all the women who were mothers who were weeping, referred to as one woman. It's a better way of understanding who we are as human beings. Now, I'm fully caught up in American democratic individualism. I am. I like pushing out and saying, I am, therefore I exist, therefore I am, and I am who I am, the Popeye mantra, right? But it's really like I am who we are. That's really more of it. We don't live in the confines of the identity of the family culture, even like generations of 50 to 100 years ago did. Our households are much more spread out. My children grew up to the age of 21 or 22 and 23, and then we talk about they flew the nest. They're out beyond the more cultural control of myself and my wife and our family. They're still part of our family, but individualism has reigned. And it's great, except it leads us to believe something that's not true about ourselves. We are, in the pandemic, they started talking a lot about this. We are in this together. Now, the part that says we are all in this together, we're all in the same boat, I never really agreed with that. We're all in a boat, and some of us are in the same size boat, but some of us are not. Our life experiences are very different. And the effect of the pandemic is extremely different on some people than it is on others. It's really amazing to say it, but there are many, many people for whom the pandemic, the coming of the pandemic, the rise of it has been an economic boom. They are making millions of dollars. Their jobs have expanded. The horizon of their economic activity and business activity has just gone crazy. And then, again, you hear it said all the time in the news and that families that owned restaurants for 50 years cannot survive in this pandemic. They're closing forever. Businesses are closing forever. Anybody who's invested in, who works in the entertainment industry, and I mean live entertainment like Broadway and theaters, and community theaters, some of them paid actors and directors, and devastating, just devastating. So we are not all in the same boat, but when you talk about human beings, we are all in the same boat, and the boat's called Earth, and we all walk around in this little planet with more in common than anything that separates us. We have some very distinctive culture, helps us to distinguish our way from the way of others. But my own belief is we can read a gospel lesson appropriately translated from 2,000 years ago, and we can read a pericope, that's a portion, of the Hebrew Scriptures from 3,500 years ago. To people in a different language, in a different culture, in a different climate, in a different place, but people nonetheless, and you read, and once you hear and you understand what was being said, what was being offered as wisdom, you say, aha, because it lands in terms of our humanness. The wisdom of the ages is what helps us to know that we are connected as human beings. Our longings, our deepest longings for ourselves are actually very much the same. I was young enough to be really caught up, old enough to listen, and young enough to be caught up in the rhetoric that took place around the Vietnam War. My brothers were in Vietnam for a year and a half, and so my interest was turned there. I was ninth grade, trying to learn, probably thought I knew more than I did then. But I was fascinated that this actually went around. This whole thing about the Vietnam War and how U.S. soldiers were going over and they were going to fight against the Vietnamese. But there was a lot of dehumanizing of the Vietnamese in saying that one of the reasons that the U.S. was having such a difficult time fighting against the North Vietnamese was that the North Vietnamese didn't value life. They didn't value human life. They were just step up to the bullets and take the bullets and send more in, and they were very, very different than anything I knew. And as a young boy, I remember thinking about that. Like, how is that possible? How is it possible that there's a whole nation, groups of nations, for which human life is just not valued? So another one dead in war, send another one in. That was kind of the way it was. And then I've learned now at my age that that's what people do when you're at war with another nation. You dehumanize them. You tell stories about how it doesn't matter that their sons and daughters are dead and that their lands are raped and destroyed. You get caught up in this dehumanizing myth that your enemy is not human like you. They don't feel what you feel. They don't care about what you care about. And therefore, they are legitimate objects to be killed. Right? Gooks. We even come up with inhuman names for our enemies. And it's not just the Vietnam War. It's every war that's ever been fought. I watched many movies and stories about the war of the U.S. against the Japanese. And in those movies, I thought all Japanese people were very short. And that all Japanese people, of course, because I never bothered to realize that Japanese was a language and there were people and caring and mothers weeping for their sons who didn't come home, and all of that, we dehumanize them. But the work a preacher does is actually built on a very different foundation. The work a preacher does, very much like the conversation I tell you here, operates on an assumption that when I do some honest work and reflection about what life is like for me, how grief feels, what helps in grief, what hurts in grief, what's good and what isn't good, and I do that honest work in the framework of my own humanity, and if I, by some openness to God's Spirit, take adequate, fearless inventories of my life and share that fearfully with others, I am able to preach. I preach a sermon in a room like this, to a television audience like this, and the overwhelming assumption is that as I am speaking honestly out of my own human experience, it will ring true in the lives of other human beings. Because we share a common humanity in the middle of all of our differences. Common humanity. We hurt when we're wounded. We love deeply. We are affected by who raises us and who's in our community, who's in our club or our posse. We are not isolated. I feel like I always go back to the wisdom of the collected wisdom of the 12-step recovery movements. And they have a phrase to describe people who come into the program still drinking, maybe still drugging or whatever their particular compulsion is. And when they finally start to talk, they actually believe that their experience is completely unique. Nobody's life has ever been like my life. Nobody's. So nobody will ever understand me. Nobody will ever understand the hurt I feel, the heartache that I have. They will never understand how difficult it is. And all of that becomes a rehearsal of the thing that allows you, as they say, to bend your elbow. And they have a phrase for it. It's called terminal uniqueness. Terminal uniqueness. The belief that I, as a human being, and my experience is unlike anything anybody else has ever experienced. And so leave me alone to cope with who I am and what's happened to me. I'll be fine. Just leave me alone. And so the alcohol, it's needed for me in ways that it's not needed for anybody else. It's a great phrase, terminal uniqueness. And what happens in the groups, in the rooms, is that you discover it's a lie you tell yourself. You're not really all that unique. And when you open up to the fact that your pain is not unique, then you begin to be able to hear in the sharing of others that you are not only unique, but that you're not alone. And then you begin to get a little nudging of what ultimately can result in help in coping with pain. And you're open to it because the scales begin to fall away from your eyes, and you begin to realize when you hear someone else describing their life situation that there are actually other people who have experienced pretty much the same thing. And terminal uniqueness is a lie. And in the more, I guess I would say the more grassroots language, they call it pity pot. Pity pot. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows. Of course, the spiritual says, like Jesus. So there's an identification with this person and the person of Jesus, the every human. So that's it. That's it for today. That's the thoughts for today. We are human, but we have more in common than we have that separates us. We are one. In literature, they talk about the every man character. The everyman character is the protagonist of the story, who anybody who reads it begins to identify themselves in that character. The everyman, the everywoman, the one who is able to help us all to think about who we are. And so in this season of Epiphany, that's part of the goal too, is to see our oneness, to see the common humanity that we have, to begin to look at our enemies and to realize our enemies are not so different from us. They may behave badly, and there's no minimizing that. I'm not trying to say that your enemies just somehow have to be re-understood and then all of a sudden their bad behavior isn't bad behavior. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they are human beings, and we are human beings, all of us. So much so that we can be referred to in one name, Jacob. We are Jacob. We are Rachel. So in that spirit, my friends, I belong to you and you belong to me. And we all together belong to the great family of God, who loves us and cares for us, is seeking to understand us and help us to understand ourselves in this season of Epiphany. We are one. We are one. Youth group, we sang that song. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. We are one. All right, there's your thoughts to think about. There's your way to understand that whatever you're going through, as you share it, you might discover the help you never knew could happen because you're not alone. And it's Friday, which means I won't be back for the chat until Monday. There's snow predicted for then, and I don't have to drive here, so as long as the power is still on, I'll be right here chatting away. Sunday, 10:30, another gathering to strengthen faith and to encourage you in the discipline of walking with God, because that walk with God is the pathway of life. God bless you, my friends, and I hope to chat with you again soon. Bye for now.